The rain hammered against the windows of Eleanor Vance's apartment, mirroring the relentless pounding of memories in her mind. She held her coffee cup in trembling fingers, watching the steam rise in spirals as the morning news droned softly from the television. 43 years old, her brown hair streaked with silver, her eyes bearing the weight of decades of fruitless searching. The phone rang, slicing through the silence like a knife. "Eleanor Vance?" The voice on the other end was formal, almost hesitant. "My name is Mark Delgado. I'm an electrician and, well, I need to speak to you about something I found. It concerns your daughter." The world stopped. The cup slipped from her grasp, shattering on the kitchen floor as coffee spread like dark blood across the white tiles. 35 years. 35 years since Sophia had vanished from the Palladium Cinema during a matinee showing of Back to the Future. 8 years old, freckles sprinkled across her nose, a smile that could light up any room. One second Eleanor was paying for popcorn, the next her little girl had vanished into thin air. Where are you?" Eleanor managed to whisper, leaning against the kitchen counter. Her legs trembled like leaves in the wind. "At the old Palladium Cinema on Cervantes Street. I'm doing the electrical work for the demolition. Mrs. Vance, I need you to come here. I can't explain over the phone." The Palladium. The name echoed in her mind like a returning ghost. The building had been abandoned for decades, a concrete husk of painful memories in the heart of the city. Eleanor had avoided that street for all these years, but now felt a magnetic force pulling her back to that cursed place. 20 minutes later, she stood before the cinema, her heart hammering against her ribs. The once majestic Art Deco facade now bore the scars of time, peeling paint, boarded-up broken windows, the half-fallen marquee swaying in the wind. Mark Delgado waited for her at the entrance, a man in his 50s, his hands calloused, his kind eyes seeming to carry a fresh weight. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking her hand firmly. I have a daughter the same age as your Sophia was when—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Eleanor understood. All parents understood that primal, visceral fear. The interior of the cinema was a mausoleum of decay. The once luxurious red carpet was now a landscape of mildew and decomposition. The smell of dampness and neglect hung heavy in the air, mixed with something sweeter and more disturbing that Eleanor couldn't identify. The seats were covered in ghostly sheets, and the screen, ripped in several places, hung like a giant shroud. "I was working on the underground electrical system," Mark explained, his voice echoing in the empty space. "There was a very strange installation behind the main panel, cables that didn't make sense, leading to places that shouldn't exist." He paused, turning to her with an expression that mixed compassion and horror. "And then I found this." They descended a narrow staircase Eleanor didn't remember seeing before. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with a dampness that seemed alive. Mark switched on a powerful flashlight, and the beams danced across the peeling concrete walls, revealing strange inscriptions scrawled in what looked like chalk or charcoal. "Here," he said, pointing to a section of the wall where he had removed an electrical panel. It was hidden behind that. Eleanor approached, and her world completely crumbled. It was a makeshift altar. A doll with brown hair, some faded photographs of children, long melted candles, and in the center, like a macabre relic, a small red leather shoe. The shoe Sophia had worn the day she disappeared. "No," she whispered, kneeling before the altar. Her hands trembled as she picked up the shoe, and all the memories returned like an emotional tsunami. Sophia tying her shoelaces that morning, complaining that they were hard to tie, Eleanor patiently helping her. It can't be. Mark placed a hesitant hand on her shoulder. "There's more. Documents, letters. I think someone has been using this place for a long time, decades maybe." Eleanor felt nausea rising in her throat. The altar wasn't just a shrine. It was proof that Sophia had been there, that someone had brought her to this forgotten basement. "Did you call the police?" "I thought you should see this first. After all this time," Mark hesitated, "there's something else, something that will be hard to hear." He led her deeper into the basement, through a narrow corridor that smelled of mildew and despair. The walls were covered with dozens of photographs, children from different ages, all aged between 7 and 10, all smiling innocently at the camera. Eleanor recognized some faces from the missing person cases she had obsessively followed over the years. "My God," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "How many children?" 72, Mark replied, his voice heavy as lead. "I counted, all missing over 40 years, all here." At the end of the corridor was a white-painted metal door, chipped and rusted. Mark opened it carefully, revealing a small room that appeared to have been a makeshift office. A wooden desk occupied the center, covered with stacks of yellow documents, notebooks, and, disturbingly, children's drawings. Eleanor approached the desk with hesitant steps. The drawings were typical of young children: houses with smoking chimneys, smiling families, yellow suns in the upper right corner. But there was something sinister about them, a desperate quality in the strokes, as if they were silent screams for help. "Look at the date," Mark said, pointing to one of the drawings. Eleanor stared, the ground seeming to vanish beneath her. The date was December 1985, 3 months after Sophia's disappearance. And in the bottom corner, scrawled in the clumsy handwriting of an 8-year-old, was the name Sofia Vasquez. "Mommy, find me." The world tilted. Eleanor braced herself against the table, breathing heavily as tears stung her eyes. Sophia was alive 3 months after she vanished. Alive and a prisoner in this horrible place, making desperate drawings hoping someone would find them. "There's a diary," Mark said softly, handing her a worn leather-bound notebook. "Not hers. It's from whoever did this." Eleanor opened the notebook with trembling hands. The handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive, documenting each acquisition with sickening detail. She flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of Sophia, until she found an entry dated September 15, 1985. "The girl from the Palladium Cinema is special," she read aloud, her voice cracking. "Hair like silk, eyes like stars. She will be perfect for the September ritual. The other children are ready as well. Finally, after so long, we can complete the cycle." Eleanor dropped the notebook, her legs giving way. Mark caught her, helping her sit in a dusty chair. "Ritual?" she managed to ask. "There's more," Mark said, his voice barely audible. "There are mentions of a cult, a group that met here. They called the place the Sanctuary of Innocent Souls. They believed that the children were portals to something greater." Eleanor felt nausea rising in her throat. Cult, ritual. Her Sophia had been a victim of fanatical lunatics who saw children as objects of sick worship. Where are the bodies?" Mark shook his head. "There are no bodies, at least not here, but there are indications they were taken elsewhere, a place called Eternal Garden in the mountains." The name echoed in Eleanor's mind like a death knell. Eternal Garden. She'd heard of that place before, decades ago, when the police investigated other disappearances. An abandoned estate in the mountains, owned by a wealthy family who died under mysterious circumstances in the 1950s. "I need to go there," she said, rising with renewed determination. "I need to know what happened to her." "Eleanor, no," Mark protested. "This should be the police's job. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in her voice. "I've spent 35 years dead inside. Dangerous is continuing to live without knowing the truth. If you're following this disturbing journey of discovery and revelation, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next installments that will continue to unravel mysteries that time has tried to bury." Mark hesitated, but something in Eleanor's eyes, a steely determination forged by decades of grief, convinced him. "Then I'll go with you. I have a daughter. I understand." 2 hours later, they were driving along the serpentine mountain roads, Mark's car cutting through the fog that seemed to swallow the world. Eleanor held the cult's diary, reading passages that made her nauseous, but also fueled her determination. Each word was a clue, each entry a piece of the puzzle that was finally coming together. "Listen to this," she said, reading a particularly disturbing passage. The eternal garden is where innocent souls find true peace. Beneath the sacred stones, they sleep until the great awakening comes. Each child is a seed planted in the blessed soil. Sacred stones, Mark murmured, maneuvering the car around a sharp bend. Sounds like a cemetery. The road leading to the eternal garden was almost impossible, overgrown with decades of wild vegetation. They had to abandon the car and continue on foot, following a barely defined trail that snaked through twisted trees and dense undergrowth. The air was thick with humidity and something else, a cloying, sweet scent Eleanor couldn't identify. After almost an hour of hiking, they emerged into a clearing where time seemed to have stopped. The eternal garden was exactly what the name suggested, an abandoned garden, but with something profoundly wrong. Rows of small stone headstones stretched across the grounds, each marked only with a number and a date. 72 headstones, 72 children. Eleanor walked slowly among the stones, her fingers trembling as she touched each one. The dates spanned 4 decades, from 1945 to 1985. The last headstone, number 72, was marked with the date December 21, 1985. Winter solstice, Mark murmured, checking the diary. It says here that the final ritual always took place on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Eleanor stopped before headstone 72, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. December 21, 1985, 3 months after Sophia disappeared. 3 months of captivity, terror, and finally death. "My baby," she whispered, kneeling before the stone. "My sweet Sophia." "Eleanor," Mark's voice was tense, alert. "We're not alone." She looked up and saw a figure emerging from the trees, an elderly man, stooped with age, wearing dark clothes that seemed to belong to another era. His eyes were an icy blue, and there was something in them that made Eleanor feel as if she were staring into an abyss. "Visitors," the man said, his voice echoing strangely in the clearing. "It's been a long time since we've had visitors to the eternal garden." Mark positioned himself protectively in front of Eleanor. "Who are you?" "I am the guardian," the man replied, smiling with an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I care for the special children. I protect their eternal sleep." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. You were part of the cult?" "Cult?" the man laughed, a sound that seemed to come from deep graves. "We weren't a cult, dear one. We were saviors. These children were destined for terrible suffering in the world outside. We released them, offered them eternal peace." "You killed them," Eleanor said, rising slowly. "You killed my daughter." "I saved them," the keeper corrected, stepping closer. "Your Sophia was special. She shone with an inner light we rarely see. It was an honor to guide her to the other side." Rage exploded in Eleanor's chest like a bomb. 35 years of grief, guilt, and despair coalesced into pure fury. She lunged at the man, but Mark restrained her. "She's been gone for decades," he whispered in her ear. "Hurting yourself won't bring her back." "But something can," the keeper said, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. "The great awakening is near. The children can return, but we need a final sacrifice, a mother willing to join her daughter." Eleanor stopped struggling against Mark. "What are you saying?" "Your Sophia is here, waiting for you," the keeper said, pointing to a stone structure in the center of the garden that Eleanor hadn't noticed before. "She's been calling for you for 35 years. I can take you to her." "No," Mark said firmly. "This is insane. He's lying." But Eleanor wasn't listening anymore. The possibility, however remote or delusional, of seeing Sophia again was like an addiction she couldn't resist. She broke free from Mark's embrace and began walking toward the stone structure. "Eleanor, stop!" Mark yelled, but she kept walking. The structure was ancient, covered in moss and vines, with a heavy wooden door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The keeper caught up to her, pulling an ornate key from his pocket. "She's in there," he said, smiling. "Your sweet Sophia is in there."
The door creaked open with an agonizing groan, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, but the pain of 35 years propelled her forward. She entered the structure, followed by the keeper. The interior was a single circular room, with stone walls covered in strange symbols. In the center, there was a marble altar. And on it, Eleanor screamed. It was a small skeleton, dressed in the remnants of a blue dress she recognized instantly.
The dress Sophia wore the day she disappeared. Next to the skeleton were others, smaller ones, arranged in a macabre circle. "Isn't she beautiful?" the keeper whispered. "She's been sleeping for so long, waiting for you. Now you can be together forever." Eleanor fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Her daughter's bones, her sweet Sophia's, had been there for decades, in the insane ritual of a madman who believed he was saving children. "I killed you," she whispered to the skeletons. "I didn't protect you." "No, dear one," the keeper said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You saved them, and now you can join them." Eleanor felt a sharp prick in her neck. She looked back and saw the keeper holding an empty syringe. The world began to spin, and she felt her legs give way. "Rest," the keeper said softly. "Soon you'll be with your daughter." But Eleanor wasn't ready to rest. The rage that had fueled her for decades exploded in one last reserve of strength. She turned and attacked the keeper, fighting against the drug coursing through her veins. They fell together, rolling across the stone floor. "You're not going to kill me," she screamed, punching the man's face. "You're not going to turn me into another one of your victims." The keeper was stronger than he looked, but Eleanor fought with the fury of a mother who had lost everything. They fought fiercely, knocking over candles and scattering bones across the floor. Eleanor managed to grab a loose stone and brought it down on the keeper's head. The man stopped moving. Eleanor lay there, breathing heavily, the drugs still coursing through her veins. She could hear Mark yelling her name from outside, but his voice seemed to come from far away. She crawled to the altar where Sophia's remains rested. "Forgive me," she whispered, gently touching what remained of the small skull. "Forgive me for not finding you. Forgive me for not protecting you." The world was growing dark, but Eleanor fought against unconsciousness. She had one last thing to do. With trembling hands, she pulled her phone from her pocket and called the police. "Eternal Garden," she managed to say before passing out. 72 children. I found my daughter." Eleanor woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Mark was sitting beside her bed, his eyes red from exhaustion. The police had found the Eternal Garden, but the keeper had vanished. His body was no longer in the stone structure, and there was no trace of where he had gone. "The children?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "All identified," Mark replied. 72 families will finally have answers. You did this, Eleanor. You brought them home." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling a peace she hadn't known in decades. Sophia was dead. She had always known that, deep down. But now she knew what had happened, knew that her daughter had been found. "There's something else," Mark said hesitantly. "They found other gardens. The keeper wasn't working alone. There was a network spread across several states. Your discovery triggered a nationwide investigation." Eleanor opened her eyes, looking out the hospital window. The sun was rising, painting the sky in gold and rose. It was a new day, the first in 35 years that she knew the truth about her daughter. "He's still out there," she said. "Probably," Mark agreed, "but not for long. Now we know he exists." Eleanor spent the following months working with the police, helping to identify other possible victims. The case became national news, and dozens of families finally received answers about children missing for decades. The keeper was never found, but his network was dismantled piece by piece. A year later, Eleanor returned to the Eternal Garden for the last time. The site had been transformed into a memorial, with a plaque honoring the 72 children who had died there. Each one now had a name, a story, families who properly mourned them. Eleanor knelt before the plaque bearing Sophia's name, placing a bouquet of daisies, her daughter's favorite flowers, at the base of the memorial. "I'm okay now," she whispered. "I'm finally okay." And for the first time in 35 years, Eleanor Vance truly was.